Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. This week we're talking about managing misconduct, and I'm delighted to have Eleanor Manley with me to help us on this topic. Eleanor is the co-founder and CEO of Metta Space, which equips HR leaders with a misconduct case management system. So she's a real expert in this because it tackles the whole pipeline from prevention to reporting and resolution. Now, Eleanor, I'm going to let you explain a bit about your background, but I know that actually you're a machine learning engineer, which sounds super clever by background, and you're passionate about data science. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. As you mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Metta Space, and we help companies manage workplace misconduct through the prevention, reporting, and resolution. My background is in data science, specifically in NLP, so natural language processing. I'm sure you've seen all of kind of the very hot topic of ChatGPT, and that's basically what type of machine learning that I do. So what we aim to do is to companies through the whole kind of pipeline of misconduct and do it in a way that is as data driven and as objective as possible.
Okay, and that's really important, I guess, for the whole sort of inclusion message. What's really interesting, though, I just wanted to flag that when I saw NLP on here, that means neuro-linguistic programming to quite a lot of HR people. It's completely different from natural language processing. So I'm very glad you explained that difference. So in terms of your background, that's how you became interested. Or do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into this whole topic?
Yeah, definitely. So my co-founder and I were actually witness to a sexual harassment case. It did half the women around us whilst we were in tech. So my co-founder, Helena, who is the COO, was doing cybersecurity at the time. And as mentioned, I was in data science. We just saw that sexual harassment was affecting so many women around us. The specific case that we were witness to was very bad. As mentioned, half the women were affected around us, and it went completely unresolved. So we then went on a mission for the next 8 months in just researching and data collecting on the proliferation of sexual harassment in the workplace, really trying to understand its root cause, perhaps how we could try mitigating it. And that really just snowballed into, well, actually, it's not just sexual harassment at work, but it's all forms of misconduct that are affecting employees and companies. And companies shouldn't just be trying to mitigate, prevent it from an ethical perspective, but they also need to be doing so from a financial and from a legal perspective today.
Yes, I guess, yeah, I can see the repercussions could be high in terms of if people bring cases, but also in terms of retention and just the whole sort of people not progressing, brand management. It knocks on in lots and lots of ways, doesn't it, I guess?
Yeah, so the story of retention is a really important one that you mentioned. Women are in fact more likely to resign than to report a case of workplace misconduct. So yeah, you're really very, very right when you talk about retention.
So one of the things, I suppose I assumed that I understood the term misconduct, but I feel like maybe I don't understand it in the way it's defined. Would you define it for us?
Definitely. So we define misconduct as the sort of large umbrella term for anything that could be sexual harassment, bullying, discrimination, but also fraud and bribery. I was speaking to an HR recently, and we were speaking about kind of the different ways that we could define misconduct. That could be, a breach of the company ethics, but it could also be a breach of law. So it is a very broad term, and we also help companies kind of refine and define what workplace misconduct means to make sure that it's clear within their policies as well.
Yes, because I was thinking whether it linked to underperformance, but I guess it isn't it? This is actually very much something that is people breaking the rules or values, or it's much. Well, it wouldn't ever have people wouldn't do it. Well, they wouldn't do it by accident or not. Would you say it has intent, or would people maybe lack of awareness? What causes it?
That's a brilliant question. It's one that we are constantly trying to answer. So firstly, I like to set the premise that unfortunately it's not necessarily about intent, but it's about impact. So, we do definitely see cases where it definitely wasn't the intention. And we like to think of them as, should this be a case that needs to be investigated, or is this rather a learning moment? So a moment where HR can sit down with the person and explain, the impact. But really, I think, when it comes to this idea of, intent versus impact, it also comes with a question of, well, today we're living with a lot of companies that have moved to a hybrid environment where there's a new set of etiquette around Zoom that people haven't necessarily understood. And also, there's a very important thing of cultural differences that a lot of multinational corporations experience. And, having to people from different nationalities and different backgrounds is a real asset. But it also means that the companies have to be prepared and have different kind of trainings and policies and also tech in place to make sure that, things like misconduct doesn't happen unintentionally.
And what do you mean by tech in place? What would you put in to prevent it from happening?
Well, this is where I shamelessly plug in Metta Space, obviously. So yeah, so what we do is we help companies with tech, so with the prevention, reporting, and resolution of workplace misconduct. So what this means in practice is that we have a mobile application that allows for employees to report all types of workplace misconduct anonymously if they choose, as well as on the company side, a case resolution center, which basically allows HR to receive the case, communicate with the employee even when they're anonymous through an integrated chat. And we also give them insights of best practices and kind of legal frameworks that they must follow depending on the type and the location of the case. Really, the goal here is to de-escalate cases, to reduce the time to resolution, and empower HR to feel like they resolve as many cases they can before necessarily having to resort to going to their legal team or going to a C-level executive with it.
So trying to nip things in the bud then, I guess, in terms of by getting to it earlier and addressing it and coming to a solution earlier, ideally.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it, is we're trying to nip it, misconduct in the bud before it really becomes a problem. And then that links to our final pillar, which is prevention. And prevention is the deep tech aspect of the business, where we have a natural language processing algorithm. As I mentioned, that's how a computer understands text. That can detect written harassment. And the goal there is to really basically ensure that people are using safe language, and that you can somewhat say to someone that if that you're receiving a message that you feel uncomfortable with, that you can report it straight away.
And in terms of that, I mean, so the language processing thing, so that would pick up words or something that would, well, I mean, there's certain words that you can imagine would be automatically offensive, but are there subtleties in terms of how people might feel harassed by pressured or anything? I'm just trying to understand how a computer could interpret something that's more subtle, if you like.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you for bringing it up. So I think and I'm going to get a tiny bit technical, so forgive me. But when it comes to natural language processing, you have something called dictionaries. So dictionaries is basically a list of words that a can basically, flag up if that happens. So let's say if something is perhaps, I don't know, a swear word, or perhaps it's, a very like a gendered offense or a racial offense, automatically that would pop up. But and that is, having a dictionary of words like that, in the workplace is also important. However, what becomes interesting is rather when you're able to add context and subjectivity to it. So the best way I think for me to explain is to give you an example, Lucinda. So
Yeah.
if you and I are, sending each other emails, and I say, "Oh, Lucinda, you look so nice today." If we have, a friendly relationship, that's not something that should necessarily flag up.
Yeah.
However, if we don't, and I've said that you've looked good, multiple times over a period of time, or you just don't feel comfortable with that first message, that's something that should also be flagged up. So what happens is we have the algorithm that's able to detect the very gray areas, like the example that I gave. And you, Lucinda, on your side, when you receive that email, it basically pops up and asks you if you're comfortable with that message. When you then can say, you get that pop-up, you can say, wow, yes, I'm comfortable, and the pop-up goes away, and it learns that between us, it doesn't have to be as it doesn't have to kind of appear as frequently, because you've said that actually perhaps we have a comfortable relationship. But however, if you say, oh no, actually I don't feel comfortable with this message, it would allow you to explain why you don't feel comfortable with that message, and also asks you whether you want to save it, learn from your own context. And within companies, that instead of just having a dictionary, which would have, words that I think all of us know shouldn't be used in the workplace, we're rather about trying to create these kind of microcosms of understanding between not only each individual, but each department and each company.
Wow. So the devil's advocate, I suppose, from a workplace point of view, my head's gone everywhere on this in terms of, first, I won't go down there. Why isn't Facebook and Twitter and social media using this? Or maybe they are. I'll save that for off call. Let's stay with work. But I suppose the disadvantage that people might feel is that this is a big brother watching them. So basically it's scanning all of the email traffic, is it, between people?
So firstly, we never collect data unless it's flagged by the user.
Right.
So we're not in the business of just collecting emails. And secondly, companies already have all your data. So if you're sending emails, we always, I like to remind people that nothing is confidential if it's on a workplace email server.
Yeah.
But we do ask for a double authorization. So, we're asking that authorization from the company and from you. And then on top of that, we only collect the data that is, in fact, flagged by you. So, we're very much in the business of ethical AI. And for us, we only think there's value in collecting the data which you have tagged yourself.
Okay, so it sounds very clever, this stuff, and I suppose it sounds, I'm thinking, when we hear the term whistleblowing, would it be like a whistleblowing, is it similar, or is it same or different to whistleblowing type case management?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So yeah, whistleblowing definitely would fall under our reporting application for sure. And although we have recently moved to the US and are concentrating on the US market, Helena, my co-founder, and I started the company in Spain at the same time as the EU whistleblowing directive was coming to light, that states that all companies in Europe have to have whistleblowing systems that avoid retaliation. Um, so I think, whistleblowing has become more and more the norm. But unfortunately, from our perspective, we think that reporting alone is just simply not enough. In fact, we think reporting alone is useless. It does nothing if you don't have preventative measures and resolution in place, because people simply don't report if they don't trust their company.
Yeah. So, okay, great. If obviously you've got some very clever system, you're working internationally. What could you tell us about how whether it's growing in terms of misconduct? Is it a bigger issue, or are we just reporting it more? Is it more prevalent in certain locations or industries? I mean, you mentioned you experienced it in tech, so maybe it was very heavily male-dominated environment, and you notice it more, or not? Was it that? What sort of themes have you discovered?
Hmm. Yeah, I think what's been most shocking to me personally is today a third of employees have been harassed remotely. So this means that in the age of remote work, which has obviously offered, an amazing possibility for a huge part of the world to live and work differently, has also brought out new challenges when it comes to workplace misconduct. So, when you start thinking that a third of people have been harassed remotely, and this is through email, Zoom, text, phone calls, etc., it really starts to pose a different problem for HR because when you're at the office, you might start to be able to see things even if someone hasn't reported it. However, obviously when you're remote, HR aren't psychic, so it puts more pressure on the employee to have to report these things. And so, as we're moving towards that, we're also seeing, and this is more specific to the US though, is that the cost of lawsuits have gone up by 26% in the last 3 years, linked to retaliation, and also employees complaining about misconduct being mishandled in their companies.
Okay, I mean, I'm just thinking, I'm just reeling from your things. So you're saying a third of people have experienced it remotely. So I in the last 3-4 years, because we've been only really been
3 years.
right, a third of people. That so would you say though, does that mean there are certain companies that have that kind of culture and all of them in there, or would you say cut any company and a third of people have experienced it? Because it's quite scary really, that if you're listening to it, I'm sure for anyone thinking, okay, so that means then if it's a third of my organization, or is it just certain types of business that have got that culture?
Mm-hmm. So firstly, we do try to hone down that unfortunately misconduct happens in every single company. You can have the best culture, but especially companies that have grown rapidly in the last kind of few years or few months and that are hiring rapidly, it's a lot harder sometimes to be able to be sure about what's going on within your organization. So firstly, we know that the companies at the most risk tend to be fast growing ones, so hiring rapidly. We also know the ones that are the highest risk are the ones with the lowest HR to employee ratio. So HR to employee ratio refers to per 100 employees, how many people in HR are there. So on average, companies have 3.5. So per 100 employees, there's around 3.5 people working in HR. But we found for a lot of fast growing companies that number actually drops to below below one, sorry. So you basically have, maybe only a couple per 300, 400 employees.
Which means
So
you haven't got processes, and that you can see. I can see why that happens, because often fast-growing businesses haven't got their processes in place, and
exactly.
are so busy, kind of almost firefighting, recruiting, etc., that you haven't necessarily got time for more of the pastoral type stuff that might prevent this sort of thing.
Definitely. And what we also find today, I would say there's, and Lucinda, you're going to know this better than I do, but there's kind of three categories that HR having to, as you mentioned, kind of firefight through. You have recruiting, you have culture, and then you have operations.
Yes.
And what we found as well with a lot of companies is that they seem to put a lot of money in recruiting and resources into culture today, but this idea of kind of usually it's linked to recruit more people, right? So like to make their brand and culture seem great to recruit more people. And when you don't then concentrate on processes and operations, that puts you at a huge risk for misconduct because, well, you immediately then just have to outsource it to legal, basically.
Yeah.
And usually that's extremely expensive, but it also escalates cases because a lot of times you actually don't need to speak to legal about it, or you just I think it's something and it's over 80% of cases that are received within companies are interpersonal or considered interpersonal. So that means that usually you just need to have people sat down and ask, what's going on? How can we resolve this? So if that's the case, and if all of them are getting, are then kind of delegated to legal, it's going to be a huge cost for the company, but also it's going to make cases go on for a lot longer. So on average, we know that cases take 3 months for HR to respond to, which is obviously scary. And can take up to more than 360 days to actually find resolution. And by that point, you then start understanding the number of why people are more likely to resign than to report. Because, when they start seeing that, perhaps one person in their organization has reported and they see the mess that it is, they decide, well, it's just not worth it for me. It's better for me to just resign. So, we think that misconduct has, such a widespread effect across an organization, be it from talent retention, be it from underperformance, be it from just general, equity and inclusion within the workplace, that it's so important to get right.
Yeah, and actually, I can totally see why people would choose to leave, because it's just incredibly stressful. It's like a divorce, right? You don't want to, if you can avoid going in, lawyers involved, it's more expensive, it's more stressful, all of those things. So I guess that's quite a natural step then for us to think about. You said you've got a toolkit in your thing, and it is, we were saying the solution has to be prevention. Have you what practical steps have you got for listeners now if they were trying to address misconduct, measure it, stamp it out early? What sort of tips?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we really encourage every single company that we work with is that you need to look at the whole employee life cycle. So really, like, top of the funnel, from the moment that they learn about your companies and perhaps are thinking to applying, to the moment that they might exit. And so you need to make sure that your employees are protected and your policies are protected throughout. So, I've obviously already mentioned, what we do with prevention, reporting, resolution. But I think there are a few other steps that companies should be taking. And I like to kind of speak about those as well, because you have to take a holistic approach. So, top of the funnel, we always talk about just recruitment processes. I think that comes with, making sure that you have intentional bias recognition when you're going through kind of your recruiting process, but also, and this is something that I love because it's so easy to do, is creating neutral job advertisements. So when I say neutral, it means gender neutral job advertisements, and you can actually use like something like natural language processing to test whether or not a job advertisement is more geared toward women or men. And that's, processes that we also give to the companies. Then obviously middle funnel, you have just creating safe workplaces and empowered employees. And that includes, workplace misconduct policies, inclusive work policies, but also the anonymous reporting option that we offer. I would also say that there's something that's so important about intersectionality. So making sure that, it's not just about the classic kind of women and men, but it also acknowledges that there's so many people that experience different sexual in that way. And I think that having that bias recognition again, but also training, is very important.
So pulling it all together really as a package.
Leadership, definitely. The last three that I would mention would be transparent leadership, and that especially comes with pay equity, which I think is fundamental. Data privacy and security, so making sure that employees feel secure, and luckily we have kind of actual laws in place for that today, but making sure the company is compliant with it. And lastly, exit interviews, making sure that you get continuous feedback, because we actually came on and were invited to speak with companies after someone had, in an exit interview, actually said that they were being harassed. Or that they had witnessed harassment, and that's why they were leaving the company. So that's why it's so fundamental to do these exit interviews, because you might get an insight, and unfortunately, perhaps you weren't able to retain that employee, but that nugget of information and insight that they can give you about your company, because that's when employees tend to be the most honest, is when they exit, because they don't have any kind of fear anymore. Is so important for companies to make sure that they're actually continuously learning about their own organization.
That's quite a comprehensive list. That makes a lot of sense in terms of, I mean, particularly the exit interview, isn't it? But you may not be able to prevent it for that person, but it's giving you that insight that you might have been completely blind to something going on. So to be able to capture this data and then address it. And then in terms of that, the resolution, those were lots of things about resolution, and lots of it, about, I guess, was capturing as well. Would you, in terms of resolving misconduct generally, or just as a sort of overall thing, does it tend to be things like education and training? Is it policies? What typical things are most effective in, because that could be culture change. A lot of this is it links to a culture change. What sort of things have you seen have been very successful?
So there's in the last, I would say, couple of months, there's a few things that we've really learned. At Metta Space, we're continuously learning about this topic as well. So firstly, I think this distinction between, is this, one fantastic case has been reported, so you have to kind of put in place different ways to encourage your employees to report regularly. And then when we get to resolution of these reports, is this report a moment of learning for your company? As you mentioned, is there a cultural change that needs to be done? Is there a clarification that needs to be made? Is there a conversation that needs to be had? It allows you to de-escalate the cases. And I think, as I mentioned, more than 80% of the cases sometimes are due to interpersonal relations, that, a lot of them do fall into that learning moment category. And then on the second part, when we look at investigation, it's just making sure that your process is airtight, that everyone who receives a case in front of them, be it the head of HR or the head of people, know exactly what they need to do. And so that's why within our platform, we basically have a step-by-step for them to follow. So usually it's HR who follow those step-by-steps. And really what is encouraging is this idea of purely objective investigation. So making sure that it's not just by a case-by-case basis, which unfortunately happens within most organization, which basically puts all the pressure on the one person who has to handle the case, but rather there's a set process. So the company has agreed for anyone who, be it in HR, or even sometimes we see some C-level execs on the platform, can actually, resolve a case effectively and, hopefully as rapidly as possible. And we try to reduce the resolution time by 80%. And our step-by-step really gives best practices for each company to reach that goal.
That sounds very thorough in terms of that. So I don't know, I think this has been an education for me, actually, in terms of this. And I can definitely see why a case management system will make life a lot easier in terms of helping people through, and particularly having things at your fingertips, being able to track it, helping people to resolve. I like the idea of being able to record things anonymously and be resolving it anonymously. I can see that that's really, really helpful and practical. If people who are listening to the podcast, want to reach out to you and find out more about what you do, how is it best for them to get hold of you?
Definitely. So you can obviously, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I always post my insights and the data collection, and also anything kind of linked to misconduct. So please, you can connect to me on there. And obviously, if you would like to find out more about how, our digital misconduct case management system could work for your company, you can just go on our website and plug in your email. We'll send you to set up a call.
Perfect. And we'll put all those links on the show notes. Eleanor, thank you very much for joining us today. I know we had a couple of little signal problems. I'm hoping they'll be all right on the recording, because I know you're using your hotspot, aren't you, in a hotel room? So it's been you've got up early to join us. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me on the pod, Lucinda.
A pleasure.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now, you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.